I'm delighted to say Jerome Starkey's here, Defence Editor of The Sun. Jerome, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Welcome to the show. Thank you. You were speaking on TalkTV yesterday about the Titanic sub. We're still kind of monitoring it. People hoping against hope, really, that they'll find some trace of it. Stories this morning saying that there's some noises being heard, possibly by some of the vessels kind of trying to track it. But it's a very, very long sort of lost hope that anything will come of it, isn't it?
Well, you're right. I mean, there's conflicting reports this morning. Optimistic news was that apparently a Canadian P-3 Orion sort of specialist submarine hunting plane, an aircraft that the Canadian military would use to look for enemy Russian submarines in its waters, that it had dropped a sonar buoy, which is a listening device, into the water, and that had heard what it thought was knocking, the sound of knocking. Now, it's a standard practice for stricken submarines in distress for the crew to knock on the side of the hull every half an hour to attract attention, to alert people that they're alive, at least one person alive, and to help them triangulate the position. But actually there's conflicting reports suggesting that US military officials believe that they heard the sound of an implosion, which would suggest the very worst, which was that the Titan has been crushed, and that would mean that everyone on board is dead. And of course the other thing that we have to bear in mind is that they have run out of time. The 96 hours of oxygen.
It's rapidly becoming sort of 30 hours, isn't it, or something like that?
Well, it was 96 hours from Sunday, very early on Sunday morning when they first dived. And for me, one of the most extraordinary elements of this story as well is that there is, we know that OceanGate, the company that owns the Titan sub, obviously they lost contact on Sunday morning about an hour after the dive. On Monday morning, they contacted a company in Guernsey which has remotely operated vehicles, remote sort of tethered submarines which can go down on very long cables, which their owners believe could have conducted a rescue operation. They have these sort of 4-ton devices, slightly smaller than a shipping container, with mechanical claws, which they think may have been able to rescue
so
the submarine.
So they could have literally dragged it back up? Well,
yeah, I mean, it depends what they found, but there's some suggestion that perhaps the submarine had got tangled in the wreckage, maybe its engine had failed. The Titan is attached to ballast, which keeps it below the surface, keeps it deep, and they might have been able to somehow remove the ballast. I mean, it would have been, even if they could have got those subs to the location in time, it would still have been a very difficult, complex operation and a slim chance of success. But nonetheless, what that would have required is an airlift capability to get these Guernsey submarines, which are known as...
They'd have to be flown over
to Canada and then put on board a boat and sailed out to 370 miles to the site.
I mean, it seems remarkable to me that these trips have been made with such regularity, because I think many of us wouldn't have known quite how many times people had been down to look at the wreckage of the Titanic, you know, because when I first heard the story, I think on Monday morning, you kind of thought, well, that seems like an incredibly kind of risky thing to do. But yeah, I suppose if you were doing it, you'd go, well, loads of people have done it, it's not that risky. But looking at the actual craft, it doesn't look like something you would want to spend a lot of time in at the bottom of the sea.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, indeed, one of our own Sun reporters had made
I heard
that
Martin
journey.
Phillips. I know Martin, actually, because I used to work with him years ago, and I heard him last night on First Edition telling his story to Penny Smith, and what a story.
Yeah, it's
incredible.
Amazing. Yeah.
I mean, those were the days, you're obviously too young to remember, when you could win a trip to see the Titanic wreckage on the Sun. I mean, incredible, really. Yeah,
well, incredible, and incredible that it's still happening, but of course, you know, different submarines, different technologies, and also emerging now these alarming reports that OceanGate, the company behind the Titan voyage, had been in legal disputes over its own safety protocols and its refusal to get the Titan sub sort of classified to survive at the depths which it states that it can survive at.
And I guess the commercial aspects of some of these operations are, you know, they're making a big margin, aren't they, on the numbers of people they're taking down. And Martin, in fact, talking last night, was saying that when he was there years and years ago, everything was being run by Russian organisations, and they had I think 3 submersibles which they were sending down. One of them got damaged in the same way as this one might have done last time around, and they just basically covered up the damage with duct tape and went down anyway. And you're kind of going, sorry, you know. I just think it's an incredibly, I don't want to say foolhardy, but it just seems to me to be an incredibly dangerous thing to do, particularly if you haven't got any kind of way of sending a distress signal, which they don't seem to have, and if you have no way of fixing a problem, if there is one.
Certainly, and what appears to be perhaps most surprising about this story is that there doesn't appear to have been a contingency plan in place. Having said that, I understand this morning the message coming from the American agencies which are running the rescue is that they believe they have all the capabilities they need. Of course, the real concern is that this may turn from what's classified as a rescue operation to a recovery or a salvage operation, because the prospects of getting these guys back alive is just increasingly slim. And I have to say, one of the things that haunts me is just imagining if they are stuck there alive, the conversations that must be happening in that metal tube, the conversations between a father and his 19-year-old son as they contemplate running out of oxygen. It doesn't really bear.
It really doesn't. And I mean, there's I suppose a chance as well that they'll never be found, isn't there?
There is a chance. I mean, clearly how difficult it is to operate there, but what we understand is that this company based in Guernsey called Magellan, who have these Argus XL remotely operated vehicles that are classified to go down to 6 kilometres. I understand that even if their vehicles aren't taken out to the site, they may be sending some of their experts to try and assist, because this time last year they released these incredible 3-dimensional images of the wreckage. So the teams from that company have incredibly detailed knowledge of the wreck, because they used these drones to photograph every inch of it. I mean, in such detail that you could read serial numbers on certain parts.
Wow.
So they know the wreck site very, very well. They'd probably be able to detect if something wasn't right. But of course, the other factor we have to consider is the sea conditions.
Yeah.
And we know that this was a weather window that they dived in, and that if that window closes, then of course it'll make recovery or rescue even harder.
And you spoke yesterday as well about the kind of the kit, if you like, inside the actual submersible, the way that it's kind of powered, if you like, by very mundane pieces of equipment. Like for example a PlayStation sort of remote, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, it resembles a PlayStation remote. I think it is a slightly different piece of equipment, but ultimately, it's a very simple construction in the sense that it's a metal tube with a battery, with an engine and mechanisms for controlling its buoyancy and its direction. But it's kept simple because the more that's on board, the more that can potentially break or rupture or crush under those incredibly difficult conditions. I mean, the pressure at 3,800 metres is immense.
It's unimaginable, yeah, absolutely right. Jerome, one of the other things that you spend a lot of time doing is covering the war in Ukraine. When are you going back there again?
Well, trips depend on events. Obviously monitoring things very, very closely. I got back a couple of weeks ago and had a fairly intense visit. We were in Bakhmut. We found ourselves in trenches that had been Russian a few days before we got there, and the Ukrainians had cleared them. We joined some soldiers on a shoot and scoop mortar mission on near Zaporizhia, which is one of the areas where they've now launched the counteroffensive. And of course, we're watching that counteroffensive very, very closely.
Yeah. Well, we wish you well, Jerome. Thanks for coming in. Jerome Starkey, Defence Editor at The Sun there, with his latest news on what's going on in the North Atlantic there, where they're trying, against all hope, really, to try and locate this particular missing submarine before it runs out of air, which is going to happen, they think, in around about 24 hours from now. It's a dreadful situation. We'll keep you updated, of course, as and when we can.